Next, we have Pierrick Bouffaron, who's going to be joining us from L'Italia BNP Paribas, and looking at towards engaged cities and technology and civic cities, specifically in the United States.
Great, Pierrick.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Just a reminder, there is a WooClap technology that you can use. So there's a link called wooclap.com/CSW, where you can really make an interaction for the questions that Pierrick will ask. And that, I think, will be in the beginning of the slides, right?
Exactly, and
Great.
I think he's just displaying
Great.
the rules.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So I think it's the test you need to pay attention, because you will do that a few times, I think, this afternoon and also tomorrow. So the question was very generic, so just give it a go. I think you already have the best answer. So we'll talk about a little bit, I will give you some insights and thoughts about the smart city and civic tech scenes in the US. So very briefly, just for you to have an idea, I'm part of one of the innovation and strategy practices of the group. We have been around for 30 years, so the banks also think about the future. I'm based in San Francisco. We cover different things, of course, a lot of finance, but we look at the smart city, smart mobility, and infrastructure sectors very closely. So we do have our own definition of what is a smart city, so I won't argue with you that we have the best. Just to maybe pinpoint two important things. The first is we consider that as like a movement, a momentum, and not a set definition. So we look toward a common goal and a common good. So the movement is more interesting for us than just a snapshot. And so we think it's definitely an effort, depending on the context and the stakeholders, to fine-tune like the best set of technological, social, and political innovations, often in a complex system with all the challenges that you have around. So if I focus on the US, I think one of the main characteristics of the country is definitely its diversity. It's not just about diversity in terms of population, which is a big point, and that's very important. It's also a diversity of cities, for instance. If you look at the experiences and illustrations that you have from the US, it's very often from big hubs, and that's pretty logical. I'm in San Francisco, and the city council is doing incredible jobs about like waste management, water management, about introducing, renewable energies. But it's not just the only picture of the American urban infrastructure. You just have 10 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants, but you have 18,000 cities in between 50,000 and 100,000 inhabitants. So that means different things, different needs, for sure. When you think about it, different access to knowledge. Of course, almost everybody has internet, but it's not just that. It's also about culture, if you can go easily to the library or not. And different level of infrastructure in different states. You have so many different actors. It's not like Europe in terms of in the energy sector, for instance, in the transport sectors, so it's much more complex, and not the same investment capacities. So depending on your location, you might find like the idea, the concept of a smaller city much more challenging. If you come to the illustrations, we all like to categorize, but I put that just to highlight a few examples and see also historically how it went in the US. So if you take the three in the center, the mobility, urban networks, it was a lot about smart grids for a while, and also urban planning and housing. This, I think, started at the early 2000. And there was a big input in 2009 when the Obama administration actually put a lot of money on the table to start sustaining the research, but also the deployment of solutions, and the private sectors enter the game jointly, and then after leverage to the first financial inputs. So that's definitely the technology and infrastructure mindset of of the smart cities, urban planning, because we had access and we still have interesting solutions in terms of perspective and modelization. So that's very important. A few years ago, we could see appearing like what we put in the two categories, citizens and governance and communities and growth. And so like Americans like to have, you know, big trends. So let's say civic tech and gov tech. So in the last 5 years, we could see so many different projects using that coloration of civic tech, gov tech, and so we will come back to that just afterwards. Just note the resilience, because it's unfortunately for the US, they had a few natural catastrophes. That's the case everywhere, but in the US, especially in the coastal areas, it's also a big topic of concern. I took 3 basic illustrations just to like highlight also trends. If you look at the smart mobility, once again, it can be so diverse. Let's say it's San Francisco, you have so many ways of transportation now. And which is interesting in terms of maturity of the market, is that now you have private aggregators. So I put Swiftly, but you've got other ones where they combine all the solutions. They propose you the best one to go from A to B, according different parameters, if you want to take your time or if you want to go like as fast as possible. So you have a range of options in the Bay Area, which is kind of amazing. If you drive 1 hour north, Sacramento, which is not a small city, you still have Uber, you still have Lyft, which is the main competitor in the US, but they are not yet outside of the US. But the drivers actually drive to San Francisco to find demand. And the other services are actually barely available. So there's no Scoot, no Spokefly. WalkMe will be available everywhere because it's a service which allows you to get information when you're walking around the street. But there is a gap. It's just like very close from SF. So if you like live a big city, you need to reconsider what a smart mobility means. So that's interesting. A second trend is and I think we mentioned that like 2 presentations ago, the shifts that you have in the working environment. In the US today, you have 1/3 of the workforce is either a freelancer or an independent. In San Francisco, it's 50% of the population. So I always take that picture because it's a bit the limit. You can imagine working for 3 or 4 different companies during your day. So it has a big impact because it changes the way people move along the day in a city. It also changes the resources and many things. And so this is coming very fast. So this is also something important. And I didn't want to do the high-tech picture. You also have very good projects which use sort of basic solutions, which at the end of the day is the most important. I took Baltimore and the kind of virtual supermarkets that you can find where, you know, elderly people can go to the library and order food and get delivered very quickly. So this is also an example of smart cities. And then I wanted to show you how the civic tech and the smart city world started to join. We have been following this very closely. At one point, I think the smart city world was also pushed a lot, partly by the federal government, but definitely by the industry and the big software companies. And so, like city councils were thinking, okay, we can potentially use the strengths and the knowledge of our citizens to create new services and to answer needs. So the number of spaces or initiatives or hackathons have been booming over the last 3 years. So, you can find that all over the country. So it's just some examples of hackathon. The thing is, it didn't go that well, if I can say that. It's good to launch something. It's good to use part of the population, but it sort of created a kind of IT and software bubble where, like the civic tech community were developing solutions, which if we were lucky, could be useful, but they sort of often forgot the citizen on the side. So it's also, I think, the way that the US are structured in terms of who is doing what, who are the stakeholders, and at the end of the day, what is the objective of launching a civic tech community? How do you manage that and define this? And I just wanted to show you who actually is financing, who has been financing it for a few years, mostly foundations. So I don't know who is accustomed by two actors. So the Sunlight Foundation, which is very close from the Omidyar network, one of the founders of eBay, has been financing almost half of the civic tech projects in the US for a long time, and other foundations. And I put also the VC industry, which is interesting, important, because you often see that there was a boom in investment over the last 3 years, which is actually not the real truth. It hides the fact that they invested in 4 or 5 big companies, which propose services to governments. But it's actually not yet a very active market. And this year, in the summer, the big actors like the Sunlight Foundation or Code for America, maybe some of you know that entity, just reconsider the way they were actually running the system in the US, thinking, okay, even in terms of business model, at the end of the day, it's not working. So they are in a phase, or they will consider the way they will interact with the population, the project, and reconsider their objectives. So it's, once again, the beginning of a momentum. That's where actually I was then trying to link to the crowdsourcing interests. And I will take kind of investor side when I'm doing this. I think we have been really good at saying there is some usefulness to use the crowd to start a project with crowdfunding, or to gather the best ideas with the crowdsourcing, like the limited version of crowdsourcing. I think we should potentially and slowly move towards having a kind of validation of the crowd at every steps of the value chain. So citizens and people are really good are defining their needs and what's going on in the communities and what's not going well. So you have services like that already. Just to pinpoint, on the physical infrastructure, if something has to be repaired by the city council, but you can extend that idea to many other sectors. Ideas, definitely try to engage people. It's hard to get people committed and engage in what you want to do. So when we start to be at the third position, citizen projects, we need to find incentives. It can be financial, it can be many things, but we need to find something which engage more people into choose projects, and scaling choose project afterwards, if it can be scaled, that's also another challenge. So that's more or less the conclusion. It's easy to engage people to potentially, show the direction of something that they need or that they want to improve. It can be easy, depending on the culture, to gather data, or we try to do it for you, in a way. It's harder to submit this, to get the feedback of the population. There's a lot of work, and to get them involved, that's another story on the other side of the pond also. And just as a conclusion, I have 20 seconds left. It's not because I'm working for a bank now, but we often miss many stakeholders and players in the picture. Banks are one of them, and they start considering, how can we be helpful? We have a lot of data. We are a connector to large shares of the population. We could give easily insight to city councils or governments, because we can detect anomalies. We can see how people are using, their financial means to move. So banks are one of the examples, but you can think about other players and stakeholders which can have a bigger impact on the smart city scene.
Great.
Great.
Thank you very much, Pierrick.
Thank you, Pierrick. Thanks very much. We're running a little bit out of time, and we have
No question.
Yes.
But I will stay around for
Awesome.
lunch and for the few.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming. This is a little token for.